coming back next year?
We're planning to at this stage.
Yeah.
We'll see whether we're allowed in, but
See what happens in your country in the next 6 months.
You've got elections. Is it?
When is it next?
A few weeks on.
November.
How many of you vote?
I've already voted.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
in Australia, it's compulsory, to vote. So everybody must vote, or you get fined. Yeah. Well, it sort of makes people participate, I suppose.
In the original colonies, that's what happened.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, here, the colonies, the United States.
Yeah.
Originally, it was compulsory to vote.
So
if you were allowed to vote.
If you were allowed, yeah. Also, if you've got a criminal record, you can't vote. Is that right?
But you can be president.
But you can be president. What's that about?
That's really strange.
There's something really wrong about that, isn't there?
For you.
Yeah, that's not the case in Australia either.
No.
Everyone can vote.
And also, you can't.
And
if you've got a criminal record, you can't be a representative.
Yeah, you can't. You can't hold any kind of
office.
On that note, can I ask a question about that?
Yep.
Jenny Hay blasted me for wanting to know the answer to the question.
So who did?
Huh?
Someone blasted you for wanting
Jenny Hay kind of blasted me for wanting to ask this question. I was curious about the whole voting thing. So.
Well, we're not experts about your voting thing.
No, we're not very knowledgeable about US voting, but yeah.
So I guess it's because I'm from Canada, so this has not a whole lot to do with me.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious because, so I guess the two biggest contenders at the moment, most predictable contenders are Harris versus Trump.
I don't know. Who is? Is that right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, they're the candidates. They're the Democratic and Republican nominees, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I guess I've already heard of your opinions on Trump, right? And
my opinions on Trump?
What
I
do you
haven't
think
voiced my opinions on Trump, I don't think.
Oh, okay. You've said certain things about him in your other videos.
Most politicians are pretty dark, in terms of their spiritual condition, and also they got into their positions of power using a lot of what I would classify as unloving techniques.
Yeah. And Trump definitely meets people's addictions, and definitely he's tried to channel people's everyday frustrations. To fuel his campaign.
And people are very manipulated by it, interestingly so. It's a bit strange that to be frank, most of you are easily manipulated by the media and easily manipulated because of the sin you carry. You're easily manipulated by others. What we've found in our experience is that almost everything the media says is false. And so a lot of what you're actually hearing is false, but a lot of people believe it's not false, and a lot of it's inflamed. So you don't even, about people like Trump, you don't even really know. Of course, he's a bit more of a public figure, and what he says, if you look at what he says, it's quite strange, but you don't know how many of those sound bites are actually just out of context, or you know what I mean? It's almost everyone we've ever met ourselves, they've purposefully taken things out of context on purpose, just because the media likes to inflame people, and because that's how they sell advertising space. So.
What was your question, though?
So I guess I was just imagining if I were to be a U.S. citizen and I wanted to vote, and I'm just looking at, there's ultimately just two parties. And
crazy system, isn't it?
Right?
Terrible system. But can't you vote independent? Isn't that a vote for somebody else?
We could write Jesus,
Okay,
I don't know.
If you're not a member of a party, though, it's very difficult to vote in the primaries. So if you're an independent, you can't vote in the primary for the other candidate.
So you mean you personally?
Yeah, the whole two-party preferred.
You have to be a member of a party to.
Well, yes.
What?
Registered.
For the primary.
Oh, I see. That's to get the nominee, is it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole two-party preferred systems, which a lot of democratic countries have, are all flawed in terms of democracy. You know, the best form of democracy would be that every region, the best form of democracy would be to appoint, say, to 15 or 20 major areas of interest. So you could say health, welfare, science, tech, infrastructure, civil infrastructure, and a lot of other areas like medicine,
insurance,
commerce. And what you would do is you would only allow people to be voted in if they are experts in their field.
Oh, that would.
So in other words, you'd have people who are happy to represent your area, who are experts in their field, and the people in that area vote in the person who they would like to represent them with medicine, and the person they'd like to represent them with, science. And then those people become the representatives that vote on the decision making for those particular areas of interest, and they are only able to vote in their area of expertise. So in other words, if you're a doctor and your area of interest is medicine, and the vote is on a civil matter, then you can't vote. So I'm talking about the representative not being able to vote. And so that way you're assured that the best decisions are being made at any point in time for any particular subject that you may raise, and everybody is represented, and it's not a party preferred system. So there's also the whole thing would be about solutions rather than just having political barneys, which is what the majority of a two-party preferred system does with their time in office. They're basically manipulating the populace for their particular political ideology, rather than actually in the best interests of the country. And so, it's quite easy to create a democratic system which is completely in harmony with love and God's principles. But of course, there's too much wielding of power out of harmony with God's principles at the moment in these two-party preferred systems for them to give up that methods, the method they currently use. And then, of course, in each country there's specific flaws. Your country has some flaws about your primary, doesn't it? Like in terms of, nobody, it's not a real representation necessarily of what's the people want.
And then also that's...
But it's the same in England, the same in other democracies, same in Australia, where the whole two-party preferred system is flawed.
We don't have primaries, so the party itself decides who's going to lead it.
Yeah, our system is more based upon the Westminster system, which is more based on the English system, but it's the same problem, underlying problems with all of these systems, is that they're not loving, and also they're not even really truly practical.
And they're not truly democratic.
Yeah,
really.
and also they result in a country almost coming to a halt at different times of, so for example, if one, in your country, if they decide they're not going to pay government employees, for example, then all of these government services will close down for a period of time because there's not enough money approved to pay for them and things like that. There's a lot of flaws in these systems that are all unloving, of course, and that's a big problem with all of these systems. They're all quite unloving. So every form of government on earth is unloving, and also prone to power, manipulation, control, abuse, all sorts of problems, and there's really the only way you can change that is by the people becoming more loving, and then the people say, right, we want a different form of democracy. And there, a lot of people don't consider there is quite a lot of good potential forms of democracy that you could use, but the majority of people haven't even thought of them, because they're so focused on just living within the current systems or modifying the current systems. Yeah.
I wanted to ask a little bit on top of what you said about, because I like your idea about the experts,
Yep.
But I wanted to take it a little bit further if I can.
Yep.
Because I'm actually in public health. And
Yep.
in different countries that I worked in,
Yep.
we actually had the subject experts. But there was so much infighting, that was so political too.
Yeah,
So my
yeah.
question is how to take it further. I mean, people were getting lost even on science.
That's right,
Even
that's
on
right.
COVID. Like, we had experts and experts and experts.
Well, if you
So-
look at a lot of science now, though, it is actually company driven. It's not real science. It's not science for the point of research or anything like that. It's more science that is based upon companies wanting to patent ideas or concepts
And sell their
and
drugs.
sell their drugs and sell their product, whatever their
But
product.
that's what people, the average people will read and listen, and that's how they will vote, right? So
That's
again,
right.
the expertise will not be.
Well, again, the only way to change that is by people becoming more loving, isn't it?
Having a
Fundamentally.
sincere interest in truth,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
You know, most people are not sincerely interested in truth. They're
True.
sincerely interested in their fear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so whoever can manipulate their fear the best gets the most airtime
Or
in
give the
some
response.
Yeah,
to get
yeah,
over with.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So if you look at every cooperative effort, it's very hard to get cooperation for lots of reasons based upon love more than anything else, and also lots of reasons based upon a desire for truth. And as many of you know, you often don't want to accept the truth when it's hard emotionally for you to accept. And so that's the same with every person on earth, you know. And if they've got an interest in a certain area of science, but they've got certain emotional things going on as well, then come in, welcome.
Hello.
Yeah, are you three together? Yes. Yes. Is there 3 seats together? Can we? Yeah. Good.
Just if you could shut the door, just to keep the warm air in.
Yeah, it's cool outside. Yeah. So if you look at all of these different problems, you know, love and truth and humility would solve every one of them. But the average person has a lot of problems with humility, and also a lot of problems with truth, and also a lot of problems with their definition of love as well. So unfortunately, you know, even when you've got 3 experts in a room,
10 opinions.
Yeah.
they'll often have 3 different opinions, unfortunately. But at least it would only be the experts arguing rather than the whole country in a turmoil. And also, while there's no agreement, you just don't make the decision. You know, so in other words, there's no power unless all people come to an agreement. And there's no decision made unless all come to an agreement. And of course, individuals may have their particular pet issues, but having a political party with a lot of power behind that issue means that the person's not even really allowed to have their own vote. You know, if they're a representative, they're not really allowed to have their own vote anyway. For the most part, they're going to vote, you know, along what they call party lines, right? Because there's too much power to lose if they don't. And so all of these big problems that, you know, democracies could easily change. But again, it requires a loving, truthful, humble desire to make the change. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a simple solution, but it's one that not many people are interested in.
That's right. Yeah.
That's why it feels frustrating. I imagine in your job it feels very disempowering because...
Yeah, because you get all these experts with different opinions, and quite often you can see, often you can see holes in both sides of opinions, but people often hold on to their opinions because they are addicted to the worth that their opinions give them, rather than being reasonable. You know, the only time that you should really hold on to your opinion is when it's in agreement with God's. So, of course, not many people think that way, and particularly not many scientists or medical professionals.
I've also experienced that sometimes it's easier. I mean, it's harder to have the right response. People will go much faster towards the wrong answer.
Oh, oftentimes, yeah.
It takes so much more energy to explain the correctness
Correct.
and the truth.
Correct. Which is what we're going to find the next 3 days, right?
Yeah.
Here we are.
So
Yeah.
maybe I just opened up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right, because people are interested in their addictions, in their fears, in their laziness, if you like, and often the least efficient solution seems more palatable for those injured reasons.
Really
To
frustrating.
do the loving thing in a sinful environment requires some effort, and most people in society now don't want to make much effort for anything. We're even taught that we shouldn't have to make an effort.
Yeah.
You know.
When you think about your own society, everyone's pretty much taught that life should be comfortable and easy. There should be no effort. You know, it should be seamlessly easy. No big effort needing to be put in, except with making money, perhaps.
Yeah.
But aside from that, when it comes to everything else, everything should be relatively easy. This is why things are poorly designed, poorly manufactured, you know, poorly conceived, but it's all based upon the love that is not present in the society.
Yeah, and I would even go further that in the US, you know, capitalism is sort of seen as God, and it drives a lot of the inefficiency because they want people to keep consuming so that they don't create things that are lasting, because they want this continual money-making machine. And people are kind of in that machine without stopping and going, you know, I can be outside that.
But also a third of your economy is based upon war, right? Going to war, making weapons of war. So when you've got countries becoming arms dealers, which is what all of the 5 primary members of the Security Council are, they're all arms dealers. They're the biggest arms dealers in the world. When you've got them being arms dealers, you can see, and their economies being propped up by arms dealing. And when I say propped up, a third of the economy, that's like everything you have. If the US stopped producing arms, you would have a third less. Immediate, you know, because a third of your economy is based on arms dealing. And when you've got countries with that amount of money being spent on arms dealing, then of course there's going to be a lot of corruption and a lot of hardly any focus on the importance of the equality of someone's life.
Yeah, I was just reading something this morning that said that 90% of all films have violence in them, even children's films, and that is even, there's even lobbies in arms manufacture in countries like the US to actually glorify war, things like Top Gun and all these things. They make it seem real sexy and amazing, and you know, the gun lobby in this country, it's all driving this economy. Actually, it's all people invested in driving the economy. So even the entertainment that we consume is trying to push us towards violence. And,
The video games.
Everything is aimed towards it. And in fact, a lot of people, without it, they feel life's not exciting enough. If you're not in a life or death situation, then your life's not exciting.
That's how detuned we've become from our feelings, is that you need extremes to feel something.
Can you speak a little bit about video games for children, like in Roblox, where they have like shooting each other?
Yeah, well, you know, I think rather than speaking about all these individual things, what we need to do is focus on some principles for the week. And then what we'll do is we'll relate those principles to things like that. Does that make sense? So because a lot of we can discuss individual issues, but unless some substantial changes happen at the heart level, so an example of that is if children have a feeling they want to compete, and if children have a feeling they need to compete with others in order to get worth, then you can see that will drive a lot of behaviour, including their desire to play games where they can compete. And so, you know, you end up with a lot of sports being created, which is all about competing, and a lot of games being created, which are all about competing, all about putting another person down because you were better than them, that kind of thing. And these kind of attitudes begin at very young ages because they come from the sins of our forefathers, and oftentimes. And so what we need to really do is address the spirit or the feeling that exists in the person as to why they're attracted to these things. Because as you know, imagine if no child in the USA was attracted to a violent game. Now that would mean then that all these people who make violent games, right, wouldn't have a market. Yeah. So they'd spend their 2 or 3 years making their violent game only for them to come crashing down financially because, they spend all this time making a violent game and nobody bought it. And the reason why people can make these things or produce these things is because people will buy them. And so what you really got to look at is why are people buying them, right? And that's a lot to do with the sin that exists inside of the average person as to why they're attracted to these kind of things and why they're attracted to buying them as well. So, if all the children had a sort of a very peaceful, non-competitive attitude with each other by the time they were able to play a video game, can you see that there'd be very few violent video games because
there will be no demand.
There'd be no demand. Yeah. Now that applies pretty much everywhere in society besides games, doesn't it? If you look at it, obviously if the society is relatively peaceful and nobody wants to harm another person, then it's highly unlikely there'd be guns in the society. There wouldn't be any need. Why would you have them? And there's never a need for a gun, by the way, ever, really. If you're loving, there's never a need for one. But, people think there is. And that is a lot, again, to do with the condition that exists inside the person. So really the main problem we have, all of these problems being mentioned, are all because of sin. And this is the subject we want to talk about with you this week is the attitude that you have to sin. And most people are not aware of their sins in almost every facet of their life. And so rather than sort of saying to all of you, you're all terrible sinners and this thing and that thing and this thing and that thing you need to change, what we need to do is more address where the sin comes from, how to get rid of it, why we have it, and those kind of principles we need to discuss more. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so if we can discuss those principles, then we can start applying them to every facet of our life. And one of those facets of our life will be video games. See, my feelings are no child should ever play any video game at all, ever. Right? I'm not talking about violent games, I'm talking about any game at all. The trouble with playing a game constantly is you're not living life. You're not learning practicalities of life. You're not understanding how to live a life. You're not engaging in a life. You're not seeing people face to face. You're paying via an interface. You imagine the world becomes something that you're sort of creating an imaginary world that you're now living in rather than the real world. And the more and more we do that to our children, the more and more disconnected they become to themselves emotionally, but also to other people. So they become more selfish and they become more selfishly engaged and no interest in others. And this is what we find when we see a lot of young children nowadays. In the first century, when we met a young child, it was very rare for them to not be interested in others. Now, it's almost the norm for them not to be interested in others, right the way through their childhood, right the way into being teenagers. And it's only when they start becoming adults that they start developing any interest in others. But even then, most of the time, the interest is selfish. Right? It's what can the person give me, or what does the person give me? And there's no real loving interest in others. So, you can see that a lot of these problems are much bigger than just like violent games. Do you see what I'm saying? So if you're asking my opinion, I know what God's is. God feels that basically anything to do with tech that disconnects you from... You can use tech to get a job done. That's if the tech helps you get a job done faster, then sure. But anything to do with tech that's for things like, you know,
TV?
entertainment, distraction, getting away from your own addiction, fantasy, creating fantasy, all of it's not real. And if it's not real, then it's not good, because it's not based on truth, living a life of truth.
So TV and movies, that's bad.
Well, you know, again, if you understand that it is just a movie and it's not real, and you're watching it for entertainment purpose or to learn something, like a documentary or other things like that, you're watching it to learn something, and then of course it has more potential value. But if all you're doing all day is watching 7 or 8 hours of video all day just to numb out of your life,
even if it's Divine Truth video, by the
yeah,
way.
Just to numb out of your life and get away from your life, then that's not good for you. You need to learn how to live a life, and many people now who are passing into the spirit world are really struggling because they have had such high addictive dependencies upon technology and other things that when they hit the spirit world, there is no tech, there's no, you know, there's no thing, not a single thing that they're using here for distraction from their emotions can they use there. So that creates this very large rage in many of them, and also causes them to generally be earthbound for longer as a result. So there's a lot of very long-term detrimental effects from all of these kind of things happening. And this is why we want to focus on this subject that we've chosen for you this week.
Now, just before you start, babe, we might just...
we need to do a bit of...
Oh, and I just want to tell
management.
a quick anecdote about video games. When we were in England, this is the only good story I've ever heard about video games. We met a young guy who'd be in his 20s, and he was, I don't know all the names of the video games, he did tell me, but it's one of these war video games. I asked him, how did you hear about Divine Truth? He said, I was playing this video game and someone I was playing told me about it.
In Sweden.
And that was when he was 8 or 10. He's now in his 20s.
I think he's 12.
Yeah, 12 maybe. He was preteen.
Yeah.
And he was playing, which terrible pre-teenager playing a war game. Anyway, but he was in England, and the son of someone else who was listening to us in Sweden told him about Divine Truth. He's been listening ever since. I don't know if he still plays video games, but I thought that was the only positive thing I've ever heard about video games. That he now wants a relationship with God based on that. So, yeah.
Well, not based on that, but...
Based on his exploration of Divine Truth. Anyway, that's an aside. Our hosts, hopefully you've met your hosts, Patty and Jane. Where are you, Jane?
So we want to thank Patty for, she's loaned us her car and her house. That's pretty good,
it's
so
a big
thank you.
deal for us.
It's a big deal for us.
Yes.
And also for Jane for providing the venue.
Yes. And both ladies have gone to a lot of trouble to make you comfortable.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you know, but Jane had hired portaloos, but unfortunately because of the hurricane there's been some problems with servicing them during the week. So we're going to use the facilities in Jane's house when you need to go to the bathroom. Please be respectful that it's someone's personal home, and just do what you need to do and leave. For
those guys, you just go out in the garden if you want.
Well, we need to check with Jane if that's all right.
Well, no,
but I think Jane's husband Jeff will also guide you in that process of where to go in the, because there's Jane and Jeff have dogs as well, so just be mindful of not letting them out, or I'm not sure. Jeff will advise you. Yeah.
Have you got any principles you'd like them to follow?
Well, I appreciate your being flexible with all this, and we are, being aware of how they're helping the people in the mountains with the sanitation and things like that.
Yeah.
So I am getting reports that we actually may get some servicing late today or something, so maybe we will tomorrow.
Yeah.
But otherwise, we have a couple bathrooms in the house, and if you're comfortable going outside, you're welcome to. We share the place with lots of life, so just kind of keep the awareness as you're out there. And Jeff is outside if you need any help being guided, if you
where the
need to
toilets
leave
are.
during that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank you,
Thank
Jane.
you.
And Alicia's helped you with parking, so thanks Alicia with all of that. That's a good job. Yeah. And in terms of our program, we're going to just go with it. You're already keen, so let's get into it. We'll have a lunch break, but if you do need to use the bathroom at any time, you're fine to get up and go. Just make sure you shut the door when you come in and out, just because the temperature's a bit cool outside. I think that's all.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah, I might have to go to the
Phones?
toilet now, actually.
Yeah, I need to go myself.
We might go now.
Yes. If you do want to record audio, you're very welcome to. We've put these little green lily pads here.
Yeah,
for you to
so you bring your phone down, if you put it right there, you'll hear our voices more clearly if they're there than in your laps or something like that.
As we've been discussing, we don't have any amplification because of the delays with our tech gear. Usually you could put it under a speaker, but there's nothing coming out of it.
Yeah.
So, and if you can speak up when you ask your question, that will be helpful for everyone around the world.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Okay,
Good day.
let's go and use the facilities ourselves.
Yeah, because we were talking to you beforehand, we didn't get to go.
Yeah.
You want to ask something?
A donation box.
Oh,
Oh,
yes.
yes.
Yeah.
There is thank you very much.
You got it before.
You got it before us.
Yeah.
Thank you very much to everyone who's already donated. Thank you for your generosity in getting us here.
Yeah.
There is a donation box if you would like to use it. Also online is good with us, and you go to donate.divinetruth.com.
Yeah.
And the gate when you go to the loo?
Yes, we need to keep the gates closed, or just rule of the bush in Australia, leave the gate how you found it. So if it's closed, leave it closed when you come through. So I think that's because of the dogs and stuff, and there's other animals that are inside and outside, so we want to keep it that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good day. So should we have a 5-minute break for those of you who need to go to the toilet, whatever?
Is it just us?
Just-
Talk amongst yourselves. Hungry? Met you. That's a lot of you, isn't it?
Quite a lot.
Yeah, majority. Yeah. Yeah.
In the physical.
Nice to meet you.
In
Sorry.
the physical.
In the physical. Yeah, that's right.
Do you meet us all in the sleep state?
A lot of times,
Sometimes, yeah.
I have a memory of you meeting my ex-husband. And
A
having
lot of times we
he
run
actually was
some
listening to
seminars in the
Yeah.
spirit world as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was imaginary on my part, whether it was real, I really don't, but I woke up and thought, wow,
Yeah.
if he's listening to Jesus, he's not as bad as I thought.
Plus we have about, I don't know, 200 bodies we use, I suppose.
I'm sorry?
We have about 200 bodies or so we use in the spirit world.
200 what?
Bodies.
You both do?
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways we meet people.
So does that mean, so you each have 200?
Well, it's
Well,
one soul.
yeah.
One soul.
Are you
It-
simultaneously?
Yep.
Are you simultaneously here and there, or is it just?
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you visit our homes?
Sorry?
Do you visit our homes?
In the spirit world?
Well, in your bodies, do you go to our homes to like see?
In our spirit bodies maybe, but not in our physical. No,
No, I mean it's
is the only physical.
Too many customs.
Someone said last weekend that immigration is the strictest in the spirit world. You're not passing unless you got the development. It's not about paperwork, but it's development.
You've got to show your credentials, but it's a soul
So,
credentials.
yeah, it'd be nice if that was what it was like on Earth. wouldn't it?
Can you channel yourself to help you with your own progression?
We've done that a few
Yeah,
times.
we've tried.
Hasn't been very
It's
helpful.
It's psychologically tricky.
Yeah.
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 Because obviously this experience is different to the experience
Of the rest.
of the rest. Yeah.
It's just
Do you have
Getting that
awareness of
information
all of
through.
that? Like
Yeah.
the 200 bodies you're teaching? Like, are you, like as you're standing here with us,
Yeah.
are you able to be, I have a feeling you are, able to feel all that's going on?
Yeah,
everywhere
well,
else?
it depends how much of a... See, a lot of now we're getting off topic
I'm
about what
sorry.
we're discussing. But just while we're waiting, for all the 14 who have returned, there's a process of becoming connected to their soul again. And so the more connected to the soul we become, more awareness we have of what's going on. So if you would have asked me like 12 or 15 years ago, I had no awareness of what was going on in the other bodies or the other discussions I was having or anything like that at all. But as time has progressed and we've dealt, I've dealt with certain things and progressed myself. So AJ, progress, more towards connection with the soul. The more connection we get with the soul, the more we're aware of what our soul's doing. And also they're more aware of all the bodies our soul creates to interact with people in the spirit world as well as here. So, but it's a growing, changing proposition in terms of how much awareness we have based upon our growth or our condition. Yeah.
Who created the 200 bodies, or how were they created?
We did,
Is it like, intentionally, or does it happen just with the process?
Sorry?
And does it happen just as part of the process, or is it intentional?
No, it's intentional, yeah.
Oh.
There are times when, it's good to be face to face with a person, to have discussions with them. And sometimes you want to be face to face with lots of different people. And in the union state, you can process information a lot more quickly than you can on Earth or in the spirit world in the other states. And so you can maintain multiple conversations with people who think they're just having a conversation with one person, but you're having it with hundreds of people at the same time.
So, does each soul have 200 bodies, or is
No.
it just...
No.
It's not necessarily 200 at any given time.
No, we
It's
create
just,
them and get rid of them. So.
Yeah, it's just as needed.
Yeah. We don't create them and they're permanent.
The spirit body we have now, that's permanent.
Yeah.
Because that's
We've got
attached
two
to
spirit
this.
bodies that are permanent.
Yeah.
The one we're in now, and also the one both of us were in the first century. So you could say there's 4 spirit bodies that are permanent for the one soul, and then the others we create and disintegrate as we need them.
But that's more a function of our complete soul, not us, as in not
We are just
AJ Mary kind
yeah,
of.
we are just bodies again.
Yeah.
The difference for us here is that we are very mind dominant still, which is what we're trying to get rid of.
Does the soul have a name?
Sorry?
Does the soul have a name, like
No, not really, but
a personal name?
we refer to it as Jan.
Yeah.
But no, it doesn't have a name.
Does it have a membrane or
Sorry?
sort of an edge? Does it have a membrane or an edge or a form?
Well, now we're going to get onto subjects that are way off.
We're getting right considerably.
The problem with talking about us is that it doesn't benefit you very much. So, at some point, I suppose, we will spend a bit more time answering those kind of questions, but we feel there's more important things to discuss than Mary and my personal experience. So we understand that you might be interested in our personal experience, and so when we have completed some important subjects, then we might leave it open to revisit this maybe on Sunday or something like that. Makes sense?
A question about this. Are we all here for a reason, like law of attraction, that we're here to learn about
This
the relation, this particular topic?
No, you're all here by desire. And that's not a reason that has been preordained or destined or that God hasn't selected you.
I just wonder with the law of attraction, like we are all, for some reason, we needed to hear this lecture on sin.
Well, everybody on earth needs to hear this. Absolutely everybody. And, you know, the truth is, though, that you guys you're here, but you didn't know what the subject was, right? Before you came. So, and of course we didn't either. We decided a few weeks ago that the main problem we're having when we're talking to groups of people is they really don't understand their own sin. And they don't understand how it affects their relationship with God.
The significance of your personal sin on your relationship with God and your life and So we want to help groups of people with regard to seeing why dealing with their sin and coming to know about their sin, and also coming to have a different relationship with their sin. So most people have a very protective relationship with their sin. So they're always trying to protect their sin from being destroyed and also from being exposed. Most people, and this is why a lot of people get pretty angry with Mia and I, because whenever we attempt to expose sin in people we meet, most people get pretty upset and angry and bitter and twisted about it, and they don't really understand why, what relationship you have with sin. And so it's very important to see firstly how the relationship with God is affected by the sin, but it's also important for you to understand that your attitude towards your sin needs to change. It needs to go from being protective about your sin and wanting your sin and desiring it to continue, to wanting to destroy your sin and wanting to get rid of your sin and no longer having a desire for it to continue. The problem, of course, is for most people is that they are completely unaware of how many sins they're committing even in the course of the day. And the sins you're committing in different areas of your life: physical, sexual, emotional and spiritual areas of your life. There's all sorts of sins being committed every day. And the spiritual, we want to talk more about the spiritual sins because they are the ones that drive most of your other sins. They are the ones that cause most of your other sins. So we want to understand the relationship between what causes you to do a thing that's in a sinful effect, if you like. Because the actual sin is the emotion, the belief systems that exist inside. They are the sins. And they drive behaviour that causes you to want to do things that are sinful. And feel, and even when you're setting your mind, trying to reset your mind and trying to go, but I don't want to do that anymore in my mind because I sort of feel that it might be wrong in my mind. But because the emotion is saying, no, but I like it and I want it, your mind is really it's really a servant to your sin at the moment. For many of you, that's the case. And so you think you want to, hear God's truth and you think you want to progress, but a lot of times it's going to be very hard until you start working out how to get rid of the sin that's in your feelings, in your heart, in your emotions. And that is a process you're going to have to learn how to go through. And so this is why we want to, initially this morning, what we want to do is sort of discuss a little bit about how it affects your relationship with God. And then what we'll do is we'll open up into 4 major areas and talk a bit about those areas. But we really do want to focus on the principles in the time we've got with you. Because the principles are things you can apply in every aspect of your life. But when we discuss just one little thing or one little subject, then what do you do when the next subject comes along? If you don't understand the principles, you're not going to be able to apply principles to every topic of when you're dealing with your own sin in your day-to-day life. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So it's really important. Firstly, we want to say that the relationship with God requires an awareness of sin, but it's not just an awareness of sin. The first part of becoming aware of sin is just becoming aware that you are doing it, and that it's wrong. But then you get to the stage, you're going to have to get to the stage at some point in the future where it's deeper than that and it actually goes into your feelings. And in your feelings, you are saying to yourself, I know that's a sin, I don't want to do it anymore, and I feel sorry about doing it, I feel repentant about doing it, to the point where emotionally you're so distraught about doing it anymore that the point of repentance is reached,
And then you can pray to God for forgiveness, and then God can help you with the cause of that sin. But until that point in time, God can't help you. There has to be a process you go through to get your will engaged in such a way where God can help you with your sin. And most people we find are not acknowledging or even aware that this process is a requirement for you to receive or continue to receive God's love. And so a lot of times people pray sincerely first, they receive a little bit of love, but then when it comes to repeating that process, they can't repeat it. And the reason why they can't is because of their sin and their relationship with sin. And this is why we need to discuss that subject.
How does grace fit in and all that?
Well, grace is what happens when you repent. When you direct the feeling of sorrow towards God about doing what you do, then you receive what you would call grace or forgiveness for the things that you do. And it's not the things that you do that are forgiven, it's actually the cause of the things you do that are forgiven. So, because otherwise, if God just forgave what you did, but he didn't forgive the cause, then the cause would remain in you and you'd continue to do it at some point in the future, which is not what God wants, obviously, for you.
Obviously, also the earth life.
Can we proceed with the discussion before you ask your question?
And also, when you ask questions, can you please raise your hand
and wait for us to select one. Okay. So here we are with this subject. Let's look at some basic fundamentals about the subject first, right? Let's do that. So you are a soul, and each of you are a half of a soul. So I'm going to draw it like that. So if your attraction is heterosexual, then the other half of your soul will be the opposite gender. If your attraction is homosexual, then the other half of your soul will be the same gender. But there's bodies attached, isn't there? You've seen me draw this before, right? Many of you. Two bodies attached to your half of the soul, the physical body and the spirit body. So the half of the soul has the same attachments to two bodies. Physical body, spirit body. Very important to understand that your mind, what you've been using as your mind, is actually in this brain of the spirit body, is actually the brain of the spirit body. The physical body's brain is actually more to do with what happens with the control of your body. And so your physical body brain is primarily focused on defining the functionality of your physical body and how it needs to survive and how it draws breath and how it does a lot of functionings that are automatic, you could say instinctual, that occur. And the physical body's brain controls a lot of those functionings. And so if the physical body gets damaged in the brain, obviously some of those functionings no longer work. Right? Now the spirit body also has a very similar relationship with its body and its brain. The spirit body has a brain which controls the spirit body's functioning. So the spirit body has organs, just like the physical body does. And they are not the same kinds of organs, although there are similar ones. So for example, your spirit body has a heart that pumps it. It pumps about twice the speed of your physical body's organ, heart. So if spirit bodies will go anywhere up to 500 beats per minute with the heart on the average, whereas, as you know, the human body, physical body, generally about 200 beats per minute is about the maximum. Sometimes a little higher, but that's usually not that good. Right? And so the same applies to the spirit body. The spirit body has a heart. It has sensory apparatus. So if you think of your physical body, you've got your senses. You've got your sense of taste, touch. You've got your sight, your hearing, smell. Now, all of these senses are actually a subset of the senses that the spirit body has. So physical body with its sense of sight has a limited range of sight that is between the infrared and the ultraviolet spectrums. The spirit body has eyes, which so when you pass, you'll look the same. You know, you might, depending on condition, you might look older or younger than you currently look in your physical body, but you have eyes still, and you still have ears, and you still have a nose, and you still have arms and legs, and so everything is recognisable. Right? But everything in your spirit form is a superset of what is available in your physical body. So in your physical body, you've got a sense of sight, but you can't see anything other than between the visible spectrum, what we call the visible spectrum here on Earth, which is between infrared and ultraviolet. But in the spirit body, you can see a wider number of light spectrums so you can see into the infrared and you can see greater than the ultraviolet. And what that means then is that colours in the spirit world are different, because the mixture of colours are a mixture of the wider variety of light spectrums. And so one of the things you'll realise in the spirit world when you pass is that you can see things that you couldn't see on Earth because they are in a different light spectrum than you were able to use on Earth. Does that make sense? And these things are a normal part of your design. Right? But let's focus on the important thing. When we're using our senses, so if we look at our senses, you've got your 5 senses, right, that you so-called 5 senses. There's more, by the way, than 5, but the average people, science and medicine just looks primarily at the 5 senses because they're the physical things they can measure, right? But what have you got? You've got sight, touch, smell,
And taste.
Hearing.
taste, and hearing. And by the way, smell and taste is really one sense. Right? But these senses, you could say, combine to help create an experience for you, don't they? So let's say something goes on in your childhood or something goes on in your life now, and you engage in some activity of some kind. In that activity, so let's say you're just riding a push bike. Let's say that's the activity. So you're riding along, you got the feeling of the wind in your face, right? So your body is sensing how fast you are going already. You can see, if the sense of sight is intact, you can see where you're going. You can look around you as you go. You've got the sense of the feelings, which enable you to balance, but that's also a part of your ears, isn't it? There's an equilibrium thing going on inside of your ears, which is not related to your hearing, but that keeps you in balance, and it makes you balance your bike so you can, not fall off your bike. And then you've got the smells that come past you as you're riding. So it's all one experience, isn't it? So when you say, let's go out riding a push bike, it's not a bland experience. It's an experience pregnant with information. It's got all this information flowing into your brain of your physical body, being processed, but also it triggers you into specific emotions too, doesn't it? How does it feel having the freedom to ride a bike and feeling the wind in your face and all of these things? So there's the experience that you're going through. And you could say all of that is adding, so all of these things are adding, along with emotions and other things, are adding to the experience. So I'm experiencing. It's creating an experience. And that experience is getting stored as a memory. So you can say your memories are not just intellectual in nature. They're the memories of the smell and the taste and the sound and the feelings in your body and what you saw. And it's adding all of those things together and creating an experience which you remember. Because when somebody says, let's go for a bike ride, your previous experience is drawn into play in the new experience as well. I remember how to ride a bike because I've learnt these different things physiologically as well as with regard to balance and a number of other things, but also like the experience because I've had all of these wonderful experiences about it. Now, of course, if every time I've ever ridden a bike I fell off, then your memory of the experience is going to be quite different, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And also a little traumatic. And if you hadn't dealt with that trauma from falling off in the past, imagine somebody says, oh, let's go ride a bike. I'm going, no, I don't want to ride a bike. Every time I ride a bike, I fall off, and it's painful and I hurt myself. And so I don't want to do that. So you can see how the memory, if it was what we call a good one, a good memory, we probably want to do it again or do it better or faster or, whatever. If we had a good experience, generally we want to repeat it at least. But if it was what we call a bad one or one that caused us to feel pain or suffering, then generally we're going to go, I don't want to really have that experience again. Can you see that? And if I don't release the pain of the experience, then that becomes a part of my memory of the experience. Now, in becoming a part of the memory of the experience, can you see I'm now storing that memory. I've got a whole heap of things going on with that memory. And that memory is getting stored firstly, it's getting passed, all the sensory apparatus are getting passed from the physical body into the spirit body. And then, of course, it's getting passed into the memories that are stored in the soul, which are all emotional or experiential in nature. And so all of the memories, the smell, the taste, the hearing, everything else. Welcome. Have we got some extra?
No, these guys
are. Oh, you guys. And so all of the experiences of the memory are now being recorded in our soul as well. So there's a very quick summary of how you store information, right? And if you understand that, we can start understanding sin to a degree, right? So what is sin? It's every time that something happened that was out of harmony with God's love, there was an imperfection in what occurred, and that is sin. That is missing the mark of perfect love. Now, sin can be broken into a number of different areas, just for the sake of discussion. In that it can be we're going to break it into 4 different areas. We're going to look at spiritual sins, emotional, sexual, and physical. Yes. And we're just going to break it into those areas for the sake of the discussion. Does that make sense? Right, so we've got the senses that are creating the experience, but as I said, we've got all of the experiences get created emotionally. Now, these experiences began from the moment of your conception, and they continue now for the rest of your existence. So before the moment of your conception, you weren't self-aware yet, right? You were only aware of what you needed to do instinctually. So instinctually you knew you needed to incarnate, but it's not like you knew it. It was just an automatic function that God created for the soul to incarnate, and it needed 2 bodies to attach the half of the soul to in order for incarnation to occur. So for incarnation to occur, the soul, the half of the soul, must have an automatic desire to connect to 2 bodies that have been created for it. Right? And that desire, which is not a self-aware desire, but it's an instinctual one, causes the soul to attach itself to 2 bodies that were, you could say, conceived at the moment of conception. 2 bodies were created, not just one. There's a spirit body and a physical one. And the soul attaches itself to the spirit body, and the spirit body is attached to the physical body through a cord. So you're really attaching to the spirit body, and then the 2 bodies, of course, are now being affected by the same soul, the spirit body and the physical one. So this is the process that every single person who's ever lived on earth will go through, and everyone who will ever live from now on will go through. And that process is automatic, it will continue. And part of it is that so that you can have senses and an experience that is emotional in nature but also sensory in nature, so the soul remembers things. So you could say that what happens to you is all of these things become the memories of the soul. So you've got a whole set of memories. Now, every time that soul or the soul of others interacting with that soul sin, in other words, they do something out of harmony with love, or you choose to do something out of harmony with love, the out of harmony with love causes the storage of an experience that's also out of harmony with love, which is the sin that exists inside of you emotionally. Right? And every time somebody else or you have made the choice or decision to sin, and somebody else, if they affected you. So an example of that is, let's say your mother, while you were in the womb, decided she was going to continue to drink coffee, for example. That will have a negative effect on your body, but it will also create a negative effect on your soul, in the sense that your soul will have a longing for that smell or that taste. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Which then causes, when you're born and as you start growing up, it causes you to have a longing for something that you didn't even know about, that you were longing for in the womb already. Right? And this is why women who are taking drugs, for example, during gestation, during pregnancy, obviously the poor children have these longings for different substances that they would otherwise not have longings for if that wasn't occurring. So that's how a parent might affect the child through the parent sin. But then the child also will make decisions as well about what it wants to do with its life. So let's say it gets to school age and it decides that it wants to, it meets another person and the other person they find a bit challenging for one way or the other, and so they want to compete with them. So now the child is engaging in some sin, and the child's sin will also be a part of their experience. Right? So now you've got a mixture of sins, so you could say, that are of the forefathers, foremothers as well, of course, and sins that are my own, that I'm engaging and storing as memories, which are all a part of my total experience. They're a part of my total experience, which is sensory as well as emotional. So all of my senses are involved.
So how does memory relate to belief, relate to sin? Is that something to discuss?
Well, as you have your experience, you can see that you start to believe certain things about your experience. Can you see that? So an example of that is, let's say my mother only gave me approval when I did something for her. So I was a child, and the rest of the time she never approved of me, but that the only time she had a feeling of approval of me is when I actually took an action to please her. So let's say that happened. Now I would start through the experience going, I noticed my mother's response to me doing things to please her. The response feels good to me. Right? Me pleasing her feels good. Me pleasing her and seeing the smile on her face and her approval come to me makes me feel good about myself. So now I store a belief, which is part of the experience, which says I must please women and get that feeling from them. That feeling is nice. I like it. So I'm going to do it again, and I'll do it again, and I'll do it again. And the more I do it, the more I get approved of, the more dependent I'm becoming now on that experience. So now a belief is developing, which is bigger actually than the experience, because it's telling me what to do in the future. The belief is really, you could say, my faith is developing. It's a corrupt faith, but it's a faith that says, if I please women, they'll like me. And also, if I don't please them, they don't like me, and that feels terrible. So now I've also got a feeling that I've got to please women in order to be good, feel good about myself. Right? So that's now a belief that is now established inside my memories. And you could say it's a corrupt faith. Yeah? A faith that's saying, unless I do that, I'm not going to be approved of. Right? So this is just an example of how a belief gets constructed over time. Now, some of those beliefs come directly from your family of origin, but most of them come through your experience with them. Right? In other words, you had an experience with them that was sensory in nature, and as a result of all of these senses and all these feelings that you're getting from the other person, seeing the expressions on their face and so forth, then you learn behaviour, and then you attach beliefs to that behaviour. And so now you, inside of yourself, have beliefs that are sins that will drive your future behaviour. And this happens to everybody. It's not, no one's immune to the process. And unfortunately, as a child, you don't have the intellectual development or emotional development or awareness to be able to repel negative experiences. So you're just having them, and you're just measuring them based on the senses, how it feels to have them. Right? So if I pleased a woman, for example, like I pleased my mother, but my dad got angry, and my dad's rage was bigger than my mum's sense of pleasure, now I'll see, if I please women, I'm against the men. Right? And the man's experience now will dominate, my experience with the man, my dad, will now dominate my memory. Right? So now I might have a feeling of, if I'm with men, I'm not allowed to please women. Right? We've got to all be mates, and we've got to all stick together. Can't please the women, because please the women, you might experience violence from a man. If you're a man pleasing a woman, other men might be violent towards you. So now that faith develops and says, okay, when I'm around a woman, I can please a woman. But when I'm around a woman and a man, I don't ever please the woman. I've got to just please the man. And that faith is now quite well established, because now with the women, I got the nice feeling, but only when Dad wasn't around. When Dad is around, I didn't get the nice feeling, I got a bad feeling. So now I'm starting to learn behaviour, right? My memories are now storing all of the complexities of this behaviour into my soul. My soul is now having a developed faith that says this is what's going to occur in this circumstance.
So the memory itself is a sin if it missed the mark of love. The stored memory,
If
I stored
memory.
it, so I didn't release it as it happened.
Correct.
So that's a sin. But then also my corrupt faiths are also a part of my sin, because
Correct.
they're beliefs about the future that miss the mark of God's love.
Correct. They're out of harmony with love. Mm-hmm. They are beliefs that exist without of harmony with love, and as a result of that, they are now sins as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A question I have is, from God's perspective, is the memories more, how it forms you, is it more statistical in nature? Like, is it just basically a tallying mechanism almost within the soul of intensity, or is there some degree of interpretation in how it gets stored?
Of course, there is interpretation. In fact, the interpretation goes on a lot more than the actual memories themselves. But the interpretation is very important, because that's all about your feelings. That's all about your emotions, and it's how, remember, the soul is emotionally centric. So in other words, the brain of the soul is its emotions. So the soul doesn't really have a brain as you know it in your spirit body. It has the brain of the soul is the emotional experience of the soul. So all of the experiences you're having sensorially are all getting passed into and being assessed emotionally. How does it feel to have that experience? So this is why when you sit down and see a beautiful sunset, you feel a sense of peace and all of that kind of stuff. Some of you would feel. Other ones, night comes and you feel dread. It will depend upon what happened in the childhood as to why you feel dread when night comes versus why you feel peace when it comes. And that is all assessed by you as an individual based on your prior experience. Yeah. And of course your prior experience is a lot based upon your choices. And of course, when you're a child, you are less free to make choices generally than you are as an adult. Right? So the more we become contained by the society and the culture and the family and all of the definitions of our role and all of these other things, that of course creates like a containment for your experience. You're not going to go out of that experience. So for many of you, how many of you have never been overseas? A few of you, right? So you could say your experience has been contained only to the USA, couldn't you? That's your containment of your experience. And so you don't really know what it's like, aside from what you read or what you see, through media or whatever. You don't really know what it's like to go overseas, not yet. Until you've done it, then you have an experience, and those experiences will get stored. So if it turns out the experience was bad, you won't want to go overseas again. If the experience was negative. But let's say you went overseas and you decided you were going to go to England, and while you're in England there was a tube bombing, and you were in it. Right? That's going to be pretty tricky next time you try to go overseas, isn't it? Like, if you don't release that experience is going to define whether you go overseas again for the rest of your life, that experience. And so you can say that the memories are all getting passed into the soul, and your soul has a complete record of every memory, but they're also getting assessed by the soul. The feelings of your soul, so you have feelings about the memories. And some memories you don't want to remember, right? And some memories you do want to remember. What we call the kind memories, or the pretty memories, or the beautiful memories we want to remember, but then all the ones that are like more difficult to remember are the ones that we felt physical pain with generally, and so we don't want to remember those. So now our soul, the brain of our soul, which is our emotions, are making selections. I don't want to have this, I do want to have this, I don't want to have that, I do want to have this. And those selections will depend greatly upon what memories we have stored in the soul and our prior experience. Make sense? Yep.
There seems to be a period where you have memories, but then they fade to positiveness. Does that mean that then that, or for my example, that I have worked through that, the bad stuff? Because I'm only remembering the good stuff.
Yeah.
And I try to track it back, but that happened too. But
yeah. Well, what's happening for yourself, which might be different. See, the answer to the question is really for yourself, not necessarily for others. But for yourself, there is you're reframing your memories, and this is a common thing that a lot of people do. They reframe their memories so they forget the ones that are bad, because that makes them feel like they have a better experience, and also makes them feel less troubled by the memories that are bad. And this is something we notice many of you in the US in particular do. You make everything look good when actually a lot of things are not good at all. But you make them look good by taking what you call the positives out of it and then leaving aside what you call the negatives from it. And in fact, this is why Alzheimer's is a growing disease on Earth, because people who try to do that so much using their mind and selection through their emotion, they get to the stage where they can't remember even who they themselves are. And in fact, your soul's intention to do that causes a destruction of certain things going on in your physical brain that causes you to lose the pathways to those memories inside of your own brain. And these things are the subsequent result of the denial of memories, all memories in the soul. Right?
What if you have the opposite experience?
Where?
Where you mostly remember all the
Bad
unfortunate
yeah.
as opposed to the pleasant.
Yes, a lot of times a person gets an addiction to doing that based on their fears. So what happens there is that you've had one bad experience, you have another bad experience and another bad experience. Or usually it also happens for children who have been given sort of a fair bit of leeway in their childhood where they weren't ever fully responsible for their own experience as a child. And what happens there oftentimes is the parents do a lot of things for the child, do a lot of things where the child doesn't have to feel the consequence of its decision, things like that. And so what happens when you grow up to become an adult under those circumstances is that you only want to have good experiences, and then any negative experience becomes something you're terrified of, right? And then because the terror generally dominates, you will start living in your terror rather than living in the good experiences and feeling that you can't cope with the negative experience. Does that make sense? Like you can't even bear to cry. You can't even bear to have shame or guilt or some other emotion. You can only bear to have not good experiences. And so under those circumstances, you will have a tendency to get very afraid of any future experience. And then after a while, if you're not careful, you'll start choosing to have no experiences. Right? Which eventually has happened for yourself, isn't it? So you start going, well, any experience might be bad, and I can't handle it if it is bad. So this is a corrupt faith, of course, but we feel that, and we say, I can't handle it if it is bad, so I'm better off not having one. I'm better off not acting. Makes sense? And then, of course, we want other people, so there'll be high demands for other people to do all the things we find hard to do, rather than actually taking action and letting ourselves go through those negative experiences. And this is the damage that parents often do to children, particularly in Western societies, where children are basically fundamentally taught that they are not able to cope with life. They're not able to cope with a bad feeling. And so that will make you very attracted to things like medicine to overcome your bad feelings. So antidepressants, drugs and other things like that. It will make you very attracted to that. Make you alcohol, substance abuse and things like that, because you've been taught from childhood that you can't really handle it without it. Yeah. And so, yes, so remember the child, as it's growing up, is assessing everything, all these experiences and having all these experiences, many of which are now being stored as beliefs, in other words, faith for my future, that are all false, that are all out of harmony with love, but we believe them.
Yes, so before finding your teachings, I used to believe in reincarnation.
Yep.
And part of what fed that is because when I was younger, very young, even younger than him, I used to have these experiences where I saw myself like among Indians, like living among Indians.
So you had a spirit giving you his memories and his experiences. And those experiences were entering you. And as a child, if we haven't been educated that they are not our experiences, and we also don't see necessarily the person who's giving us those experiences, then we can start to create beliefs, spiritual beliefs, that you could call them almost religious beliefs, that say, I'm a reincarnated being, for example, or I used to be a monk, or I used to be I used to be an Indian, I used to be whatever experience. And so the child, remember the senses that I mentioned are not just these senses. There's all these spirit body senses, and there's all the pictures that come through those senses. And if a spirit decides he's going to give you memory, so in that case, he was just a spirit who liked you and looking after you, but the interpretation of the memory becomes a belief. And then that belief gets acted upon. Yeah? And this is why there's so many beliefs on earth that are actually being acted upon that come from spirits. But because we've made the wrong presumption, and so you can say the soul is also making presumptions. It's not having. Usually when a person is a child, the parents have not educated it that there's a whole series of truths including truths about spirit world, truths about the soul, truths about your dual nature, in the sense that you've got a heart, you're half of the soul, truths about God, truths about how feelings work, truths about how your senses. If you think of the education you get as a child, if you were told from the age of 5 that, you've got senses and these, educated about your senses and educated about the emotions and the experience and educated about memories and educated about spirits and passing you experiences, and you're educated about this at a very young age, then you'd have a lot more ability, wouldn't you, to say, I understand that experience properly now, with the truth, what the truth is, God's truth. But because most of our parents have their own beliefs that they're hanging on to, their own way of life they're hanging on to, their own religion they're hanging on to, their own culture they're hanging on to, their own faith, which is often corrupt, that they're hanging on to, then of course we're going to experience a lack of education, but all the things that are still happening. And we'll start making presumptions about those things happening because we haven't been educated yet. Yeah? And then, of course, once we've made those presumptions and they become beliefs, now we'll start acting upon them. Right? And then, that can cause a whole heap of other things to start occurring then. Decisions that I'm making, acting upon a false belief, actions that I'm taking. It becomes harder. It becomes harder, yes. It becomes much more difficult, yeah. And many people experience that, of course. And again, a lot of it is happening through a lack of education of the child. By the time a child is, I would say by the time the child is 5, the child should really be very comfortable with its own emotions, very comfortable with any spirit interaction, very comfortable with caring for itself, very comfortable with cooking, cleaning, looking after itself, earning an income even. By the time of 7, earning income, very comfortable with all these things, very comfortable with his own emotions. Imagine if the child was like that by the time they're 7. By the time he's 12, he's probably going to be, have his own work that he loves, and he's going to be doing that. He won't need to go to school anymore because he'll already have a university degree by the time he's 12. And this is what children are capable of doing, but because of the education we're generally giving them, where our culture, our religion, our faith, our desires, our competition emotions and all sorts of other things are being passed into the child. The child is now in a restrictive bubble as to what it's going to choose in its future and what decisions it's going to make as well. So this is how the sins of the father or the sins of the parents affect the child in many, many ways, not just in their body, but also in their, and more importantly, in their beliefs, in their faith. What their corruption of their faith is very much dependent upon this experience. Makes sense?
Yeah. The question that you sparked from that was, what are your thoughts on homeschooling as far as isolating children from kind of the quote-unquote corruption of the world that you can't control as a parent?
Yeah, well, it's a bit off topic, but if we look at it from the point of view of this, you can see that any experience where I'm isolating the child from an environment is going to be at some point in future damaging to the child. You could say that the child, when it's going to school, let's say, or in other words, surrounded by other children, right, the child is having to have experiences that are without its parents' control, outside of its parents' control. This is very good for the child to have experiences that are outside of your control. Because it can, and then as the parent, you're the educator and you educate them how to deal with those experiences in a loving manner. The more experiences the child has, the better. So when we homeschool, we're reducing the amount of experiences the child's actually having, and we're reducing its capacity to understand love in an environment that's not loving. Mm-hmm. We're actually causing it to no longer be able to cope and stay in a state of love itself in an unloving environment. Right?
Which is a required life skill.
Which is a required life skill on Earth at the moment because of the sin of Earth, right? So we're actually restricting its own ability to be able to be emotionally aware of itself and emotionally aware of how to deal with negative emotion, how to process it, how to deal with it, how to function when it, and release it. We're restricting its ability to learn all of those things. So frequently, what we need to do is learn to help the child have more experiences. But as a parent, our own beliefs, such as I don't want my child to be hurt, which is often about our own hurt, from our own past. We don't want the child to be hurt, and that experience now dominates the child's activity or the child's environment, and now the child is going to have some severe belief restrictions as an adult upon itself that causes it to make decisions and actions that are outside of love as well. And so for the most part, when we isolate a child in any way from a generalised experience, we are actually creating more harm to the child than we realise. And sometimes that harm is even more harm than if the child was, say, bullied at school and we teach them how to cope with bullying and how to deal with bullying. That would be better than just stopping them from ever being bullied. Because at some point in the future they are going to be bullied as an adult, and if you've prevented them from understanding how in a loving way they can address it and deal with it, and how it's not their fault when they're bullied and so forth, and you've taken all of that experience away from them and educated them differently, then basically when they become an adult and they are bullied, they're not going to cope. They're not going to be able to handle it. They're not going to be self-aware enough or aware of how love would work in the situation in terms of how to handle it. So, there are a lot of things we choose to do, particularly with children, that we think are in the best interest of the child, but actually they're in the best interest of preventing our own feelings. And they're not in the best interest of the child. Now, I don't want to say much more about that because it's a different topic altogether, but you can see again how if I restrict the child's experience and I don't give the child a wide variety of experience, not, let's call it on purpose, but just the opportunity to have a wide variety of experience, and then also help the child become educated about how to feel itself and how to cope with itself and its own feelings, then the child's going to grow up feeling that it can't handle its own feelings under certain circumstances. And then what it chooses to do with those feelings is generally going to be suppressive. In other words, it have the feelings but not want to go through the feeling of those feelings. And so it stores them, and it stores them as memories in the soul, which then turn into false beliefs, which then turn into future actions that are based upon the sin. Right? And so, we do this all the time with children, particularly with children. We're sort of causing our children to have experiences frequently which cause them to believe they can't cope with those experiences. So the better thing to do as a parent is go, God created you to cope with anything. I'm going to help you educate you how to handle everything, how to handle life, how to handle disappointment, how to handle attack, how to handle abuse, how to handle love, how to handle joy, how to handle peace, how to handle what we classify as good and bad feelings, how to handle them all, how to have them and experience them and release them. Now, if you think if your child is in that state, by the time they become an adult and they're walking through life, how confident are they going to be? They're going to be confident they can handle anything. Absolutely self-aware, but also aware when other people are trying to harm them. They go, no, it's not my fault you're trying to harm me, right? So they won't take on things that they would otherwise take on if we've properly educated them. And this is a part of our role as a parent. We're not really the parent, we're really the educator. When you decide to conceive a child, you are really deciding to become a teacher.
And you teach whether you decided or not, don't you?
Correct, yeah. Correct. Yeah.
I think my question is, how do I know if it's my experience or not? Because I find myself like, I don't want to think about this, and then I don't think about it, and then at different times it drops in anyway. I'm like, am I making this up? Is this being projected at me? Is it to help me? And then I'll start to have feelings, and then I'll just stop and
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? When we've got spirits involved now, so with these experiences, then obviously you've got to remember that a spirit is just a person without a physical body. That's all they are, isn't it? So if I've become very capable of handling my interactions with every physical person that I see, and I'm able to deal with all of that emotionally well, then can you also see, because I'm now really sensitive emotionally, I'll be able to very quickly feel whether it's the feelings of a person who's on earth, because actually many of the thoughts that enter your mind are actually feelings of other people on earth, or spirits. So in other words, whenever somebody has a feeling of wanting to harm me, on earth, they're on earth, I feel it. There's a thought package, just like there would be in the spirit world. A thought package gets created and it gets sent to me, right? So when you feel hatred towards a person, there's a thought package that gets created and that gets sent to the person you hate, right? Now, if the person's sensitive emotionally, they'll be able to feel that thought package is there, and if they're unable to resist the thought package, in other words, they already feel quite bad about themselves in some way or other, they may then receive that thought package into themselves as if there's some self-hatred, feeling of hatred of self, right? And because they're not sensitive enough to know, oh, that was sent to me by such and such, by this person, they are now unable to determine the difference between one of their own thoughts and one of somebody else's thoughts being passed to them. Now, that applies whether they're on earth or in the spirit world. Right? You have the ability to receive thought packages wherever you are, from any source, whether that source is spirit or earth. Right? Because they're just people creating packages, creating thoughts, having feelings about you. And so, yes, if you're unable to tell the difference, then of course that's going to add to the stored memory experience, but also cause a degree of confusion potentially, because you're like, well, where did that come from? Was that my feeling? Was that their feeling? Who had the feeling? And why do I have that feeling? And what's going on? And you know what I mean? And you can get confused if you're not properly emotionally connected to what's going on. And all of that confusion is the result of the soul already having been shut down emotionally quite a lot, to the point where you can't tell the difference between your own thoughts and somebody else's. Right? Now, many of us are taught to do that at a young age because we're taught to accept the emotions and the thoughts of our parents. And so instead of our parents being very self-aware and also very in control of their own thoughts about their children, frequently parents are not in control of those things. And so every thought that our parent has about us, in the moment they have it, the child is receiving it. And the child has no ability to repel that thought, and probably hasn't been taught by the parent that it's allowed to repel the thought even. Most parents believe a child is not allowed to repel a parent's thought. In other words, most parents teach their children that I'm your parent and I have the right to dictate what you think and what you feel and how you act and what, you know. And so in having that attitude, we're actually teaching our children to be open to all of our thoughts and all of our feelings before they're open to their own thoughts and their own feelings. Right? Which you can imagine is a very quite damaging thing to do to a child. So now when the child grows up to be an adult, it can't tell the difference between its own thought, somebody else's thought, where it came from, why it came, and none of those things can be determined. And that, of course, is a part of the sin of the parent, creating that openness and not teaching the child that it can do something different to that. Yeah. So rather than answer the individual question, that's generally what's happening. Yeah.
I have another question. I would like to know, it's true what I think, that my interpretation of the experience is maybe a sin, not just the memory.
Well, any memories that get stored that are in disharmony with love are automatically sins.
Okay.
So what that means is, let's say you have a memory, and let's say the memory was, let's divide it into two different memories. One where something came to you from another, and then something that the other being something you did. So let's look at the first one first, where something came to you from another. So an example of that is your mum didn't approve of you when you were enjoying the company of your father. Right? So let's say the feeling she had, she was angry with your dad, and the feeling she had was that if you are in agreement with Dad, then you're not in agreement with me. You know, you and I have got problems now, right? So that was the feeling, and she projected that feeling at you every time you spend any time with your dad, let's say. Now that will be stored in you as a memory and experience, but it'll also be stored in you as a belief that if you display too much attention to a man in the company of other women, those women will attack you. Now that is a sinful belief, right? Because you don't know whether they will or not. And it's also out of harmony with love. Whether they attack you or not, you can handle it. But the belief is, I can't do it. Right? I can't be nice to a man when I'm in the company of women. In other words, I can't be loving towards a man when I'm in the company of women who don't like men. Right? Now what will happen then is you'll start acting upon it. So whenever you're in a private relationship with a man, you'll treat him quite well. You know, like you have a good, happy experience. But as soon as there's another woman around, you're going to reject the man. Every time. So you're now sinning by rejecting the man. But it's based upon a belief that says, I won't get the women's approval if I accept the man. Right? So that's an example of a memory, which I had all of these different parts to the experience, but also getting stored emotionally, and you had an assessment. The assessment was, my mother, but see, we don't think of it as a child like my mother, we just think of it as all women in authority, all women who have power over me, are going to be disappointed if I like spending time with a man. That's how we'll feel. It'll be a sin, because it's out of harmony with love, but it would be a feeling that we feel is real. That makes sense? So that's if somebody else did something. So let's look at the second scenario, where you do something. So let's say you decide to tell the truth to somebody. So let's say you did something wrong in the past, but the person you're telling the truth to didn't know that you did it, but you decided it's right to tell the truth. So in that moment you're saying, it's right to tell the truth, your conscience is bothering you and you feel like you need to tell the truth, so you tell it. And the person reacts by attacking you. Now, if I'm not morally sound in that circumstance, I will start to feel that it's unwise to tell the truth. Because usually people don't want to hear it, is what I'll tell myself. So what I will do then is I will set up a belief that supports that I shouldn't have to cope with somebody's anger in the state where I'm telling truth. So what that means now is I'm relating truth to people's anger, and I'm also, which is actually not the reason for their anger, right? But I'm relating it and in my own assessment, I'm saying they're angry because I told the truth, rather than they're angry because they just didn't want to know the truth. It's got nothing to do with me telling it. It's got everything to do with them. Instead of doing that, I go, it's my fault that they're angry. And why they're angry is because I told the truth. So now, if I'm not careful, I'll set up a belief that says telling the truth is bad. Because people always respond angrily, and if they're going to respond angrily, then I don't want to do it anymore. So now I'll be tempted from then on to justify that experience and lie whenever I have the opportunity in order to prevent people's anger. So you could say that the emotion, the memory is stored, And the belief was created now. The belief being that telling the truth is unwise. Telling the truth is always going to result in people's anger. Right? And ironically, the more I have that belief, the more God's laws are going to have the attractions trying to confront the belief. So the more I have to tell the truth, the more people will get angry with me now. Until I confront the belief and go through it all and release the belief, that's what will be happening from now on. Right? And once I release the belief, I can tell the truth and people won't get angry with me anymore, probably. Right? Or you could say some will get angry, some might not, but it won't be your fault either way as to which path they chose. But because before you joined their response to your own action, you created a false belief which was sinful that then causes you to take the continual action in the future. Right? So these are the kind of things we do. We're very slippery. We're slippery emotionally, you could say. We don't want to feel certain emotions. And so we end up creating these belief structures that support us denying emotion of all sorts. And these belief structures then force us into, or you could say we're choosing to retain them, but the beliefs we've chosen to retain are going to force us into future sins. We'll do more things out of harmony with love because the beliefs are out of harmony with love, and therefore what we choose to do based on those beliefs are going to be out of harmony with love as well. Yeah.
Just to add on the example that you mentioned between the mother influencing the child.
Yep.
How does that relate still the mother and child but at an older age?
If the mother has some influence over the child during its childhood, then of course when the child is 40 and the mum's 60, she's probably still going to have the same level of influence.
So it still does. Okay.
So
until the child releases the memory of the sin, and then mother's attitude will have no more
influence. Yeah. Of course, mum's going to be pretty angry.
Exactly, and mum still controls.
Well, she'll try to attempt to.
Even as an adult, she'll control the...
Well, no, she'll attempt to.
Okay.
And how much the child allows will be how much control she has.
This is
but
why
if the child does not know, even as an adult...
Well, it's not that you don't know, because you're feeling the pain of it. So often you do know. You just tell yourself, it's too hard to repel her. It's too hard to say no. But that's a lie. You're telling yourself, of course. So it's out of harmony with truth. It's not too hard to say no. You just say no, and then you don't do it. That's what we have to do. And then when she tries to browbeat you into doing it, you say, out of my life, Mum. I don't want you in my life. Why are you going to do that? But the average person isn't prepared to do that because they are not prepared to feel the emotion that they've no longer got a relationship with their mother. So they don't want to feel that emotion. Right? And by the way, she's not your mother. God's your mother. Right? So don't want to feel that emotion, and so you end up accepting the behaviour. This is where we sin by omission, because we're basically accepting from other people behaviour that is unloving, and the main reason why we are is because we don't want to take action, more loving action on our part, if it means there might be a conflict with those persons. Right? And so this is like sin, that again, memories in our souls. Every time I had a conflict, I always felt guilty afterwards, but that's just a memory based on your mother or your father making you feel guilty every time you had a conflict in the past. Right? What you've got to do, if you're connected with God, you go, is a conflict worthwhile? And when I say is a conflict, what I mean a disagreement, is it worthwhile? Because if it's in harmony with love, then the conflict must be had. Right? And when I say in harmony with love, what I mean is if somebody is trying to push you into doing an unloving thing, or they're being unloving in their attitude towards you, it'd be loving on your part to not accept that. And to actually raise that, and if they continue their behaviour, to remove yourself from their life would be a wise course and a loving course of action. But the average person's not prepared to do that. Yeah. And so they accept the behaviour and they say, oh, but why does my mum still have influence over me when I'm 40? Well, it's because you're letting her have influence over you. And there is a predisposition towards it, which is a sin inside of the child, who is now an adult. But there's also obviously a sin inside the mother, thinking she can get away with it. Right? And both sins need to be addressed, really. If there's ever going to be a loving relationship in the future, both sins would have to be addressed. Yep.
So the memories that are stored in the soul,
yep,
that are sins because of the beliefs and the everything behind it that's causing you to act on it.
Correct.
But when you clear that, the memory's still there. You still remember the event or whatever, but the drivers behind it are gone.
Spot on.
Okay.
The cause.
Yeah.
You can say the drivers behind it are the cause of why you choose to sin in the future, right?
Yeah.
So if you get rid of the cause, can you see you'll no longer sin in the future?
Yeah, but the actual memory of the event's there, but there's nothing behind it.
Yeah, well, the memory now does have no emotional signature to it, because there's another factor of the soul you must consider, and that is when this soul experiences emotions completely, it no longer stores the emotional side of the memory.
Okay, that's.
So all it stores is the sight, the touch, the smell, the taste, and everything. Yeah. The actual intellectual memory, you could say, and sensory memory, but without any hard emotions.
That's what I was asking. Thank you.
Does that make sense? Yeah. So when this soul chooses to feel its emotional response to the memories, then the memories dissipate in their power to affect you in the future.
Okay.
And that's what is called forgiveness of sin. So there's two ways to have sin forgiven. One is that God forgives your sin. In other words, God removes the emotional signature of the memory from you. That's one way. To do that, you have to become aware and awaken to sin and repent for it. The second way is that you get to a state of forgetfulness. In other words, emotionally, you've forgotten what it felt like to want to do that thing.
Okay.
And so there is a statement, if you read the Paget messages, for example, there's a statement in there that says, forgiveness is forgetfulness. And that's what it means. Forgetfulness of the feelings, the emotions. Yeah? So the intellectual memory remains, and the sensory memories remain too, by the way. So you can cast your mind back and go, yes, I saw the picture there, and I saw the sight there, and I heard this sound there, and I heard this experience there, and I did all of that, but I no longer have any bad feelings about it. Make sense?
The benefit of doing it with God, though, isn't it, is that you can become wise in the process. You actually, because you, in that forgiveness, when you open yourself up to feel God's forgiveness and allow the cause to be removed, there's love involved in that. And so actually the memory no longer holds negative emotion, but now you're actually wise as to the loving laws that govern that experience, the loving action to take in response to similar experiences. So it's actually a growing of wisdom, not just a forgetful process where you think, oh, I won't engage in that anymore and I no longer feel negative about it. The involving God in that process is a much more complete experience.
Yeah. Where now you're put in the same possible experience in the future and you know exactly what to do instantly.
And you can respond in a very loving way towards yourself and everyone.
So you don't even have to think about it anymore. So when you're in a state where the emotion is still there, if you want to do the loving thing, you've got to go, hang on a sec. The emotion's saying I want to yell and scream at this person, but I can't do that. It's not loving to do that, you know. So what do I do? You know, like maybe I withdraw from them, or that's unloving too from God's perspective, so that's not working either. And then and you try to use your mind to try and resolve the fact that you just want to go and yell and scream at the person.
Or pander to them, or whatever you want to do.
Or whatever it is you want to do. And so you can see that if I get rid of the emotional belief, which is driving my faith for my future actions, if I get rid of that, then I no longer am confused about what to do either. So now I can make decisions, instant decisions that are going to be loving every time. Without having to think about them. And in fact, you get to the stage where you don't think about any decision at all. Every decision is emotional, and every emotional decision is loving. In other words, in harmony with God's love.
Do my sins and false beliefs and my soulmates, do they impact
Well, what happens, this was questions that are commonly asked.
Yes, we have
talked about
this
it a lot.
in Portugal. I think we might have talked about it here last weekend.
And I think also in Canada.
Yeah.
But fundamentally what happens when you arrive on Earth, most people are not consciously aware they have a soulmate. And so there's very, very little emotion and memories that are passing between the soulmates. So in other words, you're acting like you're an individual rather than your whole soul being the individual. And you're taught that from childhood, that you're an individual, not your whole soul. Because of that, the average person doesn't have feelings for their soulmate. Right? The feelings for their soulmate begin to be triggered during puberty sometimes. Right? And that's where you start feeling your sexual attractions and other things. And so there's some feelings that start passing back and forward there. But unfortunately, because of the sins that we have in our soul, it's like a barrier between the two. This is why I've drawn them separately. Is that there's like a barrier between the two where not much information can pass between the two halves. Now, of course, if you were brought up differently to that, let's say your mum and dad were celestial spirits, that they're on Earth, and their mum and dad were as well on Earth, you can imagine now, as soon as the two souls are born, there's already emotions passing freely between the two halves. So one person's experience becomes the other person's experience as well, right? That's what would happen under those circumstances.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it'd be beautiful. Yeah. But unfortunately, for all of us that have ever lived on Earth up until now, of course, there's been this barrier. And this emotional barrier has some benefits as well as some drawbacks. Benefits being that your soulmate has experiences, and unfortunately they're going to have to go through their own experience, and you don't have to go through their experience for them. But eventually what will happen is that once you've felt enough of your own experiences and start having a longing to feel your soulmate's experiences, then you'll be perfectly okay having some of their experiences. And in fact, to get to a union state, which is the 36th sphere state, you have to do that with every experience. That's how you get to the union state. There are no barriers between the two halves anymore at all. No feeling barriers, no emotional barriers, no memory barriers. They're all there, like Mary's memories and my memories, Mary's memories, and so forth. And even your desires are the same. My desires are her desires, her desires are my desires. And that's the more you get rid of the barriers, that's what eventually happens. But when you begin, because of the separation and also because of the education of your childhood, a lot of that doesn't even start until puberty, where you start having some sharing of feelings. And even then, mostly they're only sexual in nature and not based upon anything else, because there's so much separation. Make sense?
Thank you.
What about the emotion of love? Does your soul hold on to that, or does that flow through you as well?
God designed every emotion to pass through you. So love is not something you would hold on to. You would let it pass through you. You get to a stage, though, when you're at one with God, that the love is passing through you all the time. It's not the same love as it was 5 seconds ago, right? Because that emotion has already passed through you. But there's a constant flow of love passing through you. Does that make sense? So you get to the stage where all emotion passes through you, and the ones that are loving can continue to pass through you all the time.
How do you build up God's love then? Or because God's love is transforming our soul.
Well, God's love is transforming your soul in the way that it's changing the nature of your soul and its capacity to feel. So you could say, firstly, it comes into your soul, it changes the design of your soul.
But doesn't store it.
Sorry?
Your soul's not storing that love.
No, it's passing through you, but the work it does as it's passing through you is this work of changing and transforming your soul. In other words, you become in such alignment to God's feelings of love for you that now you're feeling his love for you constantly. And that his love for you is passing through you all the time. So now that it's having the effect of passing through you all the time, every decision you make and every action you take is going to be harmonious with the love passing through you. Because if it wasn't, then the love would stop passing through you, right? And so you get to a stage when you're at one with God where the love is passing through you all the time to the extent you've asked for it, right? And there's no sin stopping it or preventing it from passing through you. And so what happens is now the love is passing through you all the time. So now you could say you're permanently connected to God's love and the flow of it passing through you to the degree that you've asked for it. But that degree would have to be enough for it to be permanently passing through you all the time, if that makes sense. And even if by that stage it's just a trickle, you could say. It's not like a rush. Sort of like a trickle of God's love passing through you all the time. Now you could say you're at one with God. You're also conscious at that point that you're immortal. You're conscious that you can't ever really do anything that's unloving anymore in your soul. You can't do anything that's unloving anymore. And that then guides your actions. So, and the reason why it guides your actions is that you're not thinking about your actions. Anytime you go to do something, you automatically feel the harmony with the love or the disharmony with it, right? And anything disharmonious you can't do. You don't even want to do it. You have no desire to do it. And physically you can't do it anymore. You follow? Yep.
That's a very good segue into the title of the talk, isn't it?
Yeah.
Actually, the relationship between sin and your relationship with God.
Yeah. Can you see what the problem of sin is from that explanation? Every sin you have is like a block to the flow of God's love. Right? So every sin you have stops God's love from flowing through your soul. There's a lot of reasons why it does, but one of the main reasons is because every sin creates an insincerity inside of you to desiring love in harmony with God.
And you can't ask for it at that point.
You can't ask for it anymore because your sincerity, which is the way God measures whether you want it or not, is now tainted by the sin. The sin is saying, I don't want it. I don't want the results of it. I don't want to feel it. I don't want to act upon those feelings anymore. I want to do what I want, what my sin wants. I want to do that. And so the problem with the sin is it creates a state of insincerity. It stops the flow of God's love into your soul, not because God wants to stop it, but because your sin stops it.
It's an expression of your will.
Correct.
For something other than God's love.
Yeah. I feel it like.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's like that. It's like,
go away.
Go away. Yeah. I don't want you.
I want this.
I want this. I don't want that.
Yeah.
I want to do this. If I have that, then I won't want to do this. But I want this. So I want the sin.
I really want that.
I want the sin. I really want the sin. So I want to do that. And if I get some of the love, I won't want to do it anymore. I don't want that. I want to keep doing this. And that's why the sin inside of you is such an important thing to look at for your relationship with God, because without you looking at it, what you're going to keep doing is you're going to fool yourself by asking for God's love, but you're not asking, because the sin is saying, I'm not sincere about it, I want my sin. Yeah? And so the relationship with God, you need to first become aware of the sin to realise, this is why I'm not receiving God's love. The sin is saying, I want that rather than that. The sin demands that it wants what it wants. It wants to keep the error. Right? And unless I'm prepared to become aware of it to the point where I awaken and then repent for it, then I'm going to stay in that state for the rest of my existence unless I get rid of some of the sin. And you could say in the end, the sins really create a sin against the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit being the conduit via which the love flows. So while I'm rejecting the love, and I'm not rejecting it intellectually, I'm rejecting it, my beliefs and my memories and my desire to sin is rejecting it, right? And my sin, the feelings that I have to sin, are rejecting the love. So I can think that I'm asking God for love, but actually my feelings are saying I don't want it. And what God responds to is your soul, not your mind. So he's responding to the feelings you have, which are, I don't want it, I want to keep sinning. Yeah.
And it's specific to each sin. So you can receive love on one topic, let's say, because you've awakened to it.
Where you become repentant for that particular sin, yes, of course. And God's love can come to a degree, and then also remove the cause as to why you just wanted to do that thing. So God's love can do that. Yeah. But then if you've got other sins you want to continue, then of course now God's love can't flow again.
You don't have to get rid of all your sins in order to receive God's love.
No, but you need to be prepared to get at least rid of one each time.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Right. You can pick them off.
And this is why a person deals with the first one. Quite often the first one is a recognition that God's got love. So when we believe that God doesn't have love for us, that's a sin, right? And when we first have the recognition that God does have love for us, that's often the time that the person receives the first amount of love. But then they've got all these other sins. Now, how do they receive the next love? More love. They're going to have to deal with one more sin. Right? The first sin was being dealt with in the sense of rejecting God altogether. So that's been dealt with. Now I'm saying I want to receive some of God's love, and so I do. But now maybe what I want is God's love to come and solve my problems for me. That's a sin. So now if I'm going, I've got all these problems in my life, I want more of that love to solve my problems, that's a sin. And until I work through that sin, I'm not going to receive more. You follow?
Yep.
Yep. And this is why people often receive it once and then never again. Because they never deal with anything else. Yeah.
And this is why we've been talking a lot, isn't it, about the spiritual principles or the beliefs and the faiths we have on a spiritual level. Because when we shift those sins, it's less...
Big.
Yeah, it's less like picking them off one by one.
You're picking off in whole groups.
Yeah, there's whole shifts in your beliefs which can really impact your relationship with God quite a lot, and then make you very sensitive to other areas where you're sinning quite quickly.
So an example of that, let's say I recognise there's a physical sin, like let's say wiping my bottom with toilet paper is a physical sin, right? So we're actually sinning against God and God's principles when we do that. Right? So that's an interesting idea. We'll have to deal with that at some point. But let's say that's the sin. Let's say I do work through that by looking at the environment, the destruction to the environment, feeling about the destruction to the environment that's occurring to create my toilet paper. I look at the different options that I have, like bidet, I look at water as the solution rather than paper as my solution and so forth, and something that is replenishable and cleanable and all those kind of things. And I work through that emotionally, and I get to the point where I don't even feel like I ever want to wipe my bottom with toilet paper again. And the only time I ever do it in the future is under duress. In other words, when there's no other option. Right? So let's say that's what I've done with toilet paper. Now, that's a physical sin that I've addressed, but I might not have addressed all the economy issues that sin holds. So there's economy issues that are spiritual beliefs. In other words, where I don't understand the principle of love in economy and what economic action looks like. Now, if instead of dealing with that one little thing of wiping my bottom with toilet paper, I instead focused on dealing with the sin that I have regarding economy, that I'm prepared to do uneconomical things in lots of areas of my life. Like I'm prepared to be uneconomical with dealing with my emotions. In other words, I reason myself out of things rather than feeling myself through things. I'm prepared to do uneconomical things with my spiritual beliefs. In other words, hold on to spiritual beliefs that are not simple. In other words, that are so complicated that they make my life complicated. Right? And holding on to the issues of economy with regard to my physical actions. In other words, with the way that I use my money. I'm so it's all my money. I don't see it as flowing like water. I don't see the economy principle in that. If I've got money, the best thing I can do is use it, because if I use it, then it's going to benefit you. Right? If I store it, who's it benefiting? Not even me. It's an illusion. I've got an illusion that it's benefiting me, but it's actually stuck in some bank somewhere. And who's it actually benefiting? Whoever is the shareholders of that bank is who it's benefiting. That's it. Not even benefiting me or anybody I've chose to care about. It's getting stored. So it'd be far better if I learnt how to use my funds as a part of that principle of economy. So you can see that if I have the proper principle of economy, then it's going to affect, there's going to be changes, wholesale changes in my life, right across the board, including me wiping my bottom with toilet paper. Right? But it's also going to be my use of plastic, my use of, any single use item, keeping my car functioning well, so that instead of, having to replace it every 5 years because I wreck it, that I don't have to replace it every 20 or 30 or 40 years. That kind of thing, where I get the maximum use out of the thing that is being created. I look after my environment, look after my home, I don't let it get run down. That's all part of these principles of economy. And if I deal with the principle of economy, all these areas of my life will change. Hundreds of areas of my life.
Does it just expose them, or will they actually change?
Well, as I deal with the sin that I have, which are the emotions driving me to make the decisions I make currently, then of course, once I deal with the sins that I have about the principle of economy, I will see everywhere where I'm being uneconomical.
And no longer feel drawn to the lack of economy. So a lot of times we lack economy because we're lazy, or we're fearful, or we'll say, I've got to deal with that fear, I've got to deal with it, and it will be highlighted immediately. And some of it will already be gone as you're dealing with just loving economy, receiving that truth.
Do you still then have to go to each individual sin?
Or you'll automatically do that.
No, you just will change your actions, but you won't have to deal with an emotion about every single part. Yeah.
Because you've dealt with the economy issue as a large issue. Yeah. So you can deal with the small issue, like just wiping my bottom, which is an economy issue in a tiny little area of my life. It's a 1 minute process of your life, once or twice a day, let's say, where it's being affected. But then there's other areas of the economy issue that are affecting every single decision that you make every single day. And so isn't it better to deal with the economy issue as a big issue that then will affect all of those areas of your life, not just the area with regard to toilet paper?
Yeah. And that will release the cause.
Well, once you're repentant, you got to become aware of what you need to be repentant for. Mm-hmm. So once you start seeing, this little toilet paper issue is a part of a much bigger problem. It's the big problem of what I think is economical and what I think isn't. Mm. It's what I believe to be economy versus what I believe isn't economy. And once I start going, I can start talking to God about, this is a huge issue in my life. This is not just a little toilet paper issue. This is a huge issue where everything I choose to do, for the most part, is uneconomical.
It's for a lot of us, we think what we call economy is actually expedience. What's good for me what requires the least effort or finance for me. But when
Can I say it's even uneducated expedience?
Yes.
Because a lot of times the other things are even better. But
that's right. It's just our flawed viewpoint of those things.
Yeah.
And when you come to want to deal with those things, then you start to open up to God's truth about, economy actually is not just about me. It's about everything and everybody.
The environment, all of you. I mean, how I use my money affects all of you.
Yeah. And if I'm truly economical, I value the resources of everyone, not just me. But as you deal with those emotions that are opposing that truth, if you like, then that will affect how you behave in all areas of your life. Yep. And that won't be a hugely drawn out, dragged out, I've got to deal with a feeling about each of these things, because the global governing feelings, the desire for the sin,
which is the belief about economy that you hold,
will be gone. You'll have received God's truth about it if you involve God in the process, and many things will change easily, and you won't have to deal with a feeling about toilet paper. or your body.
You'll just notice yourself doing something
and you'll think, why am I doing this?
And you'll want to change it.
Yeah.
Here I go again. I need to change that. Here I go. I need to change that. And it won't be like, a big trauma to change it. Like, because the sin is no longer in you emotionally. It's not. The only time it's traumatic to change something is when the sin's in you still.
Yes.
You're fighting the sin that's in you.
Sin is like the desire drawing me away from the loving action.
So while the sin remains, the emotional sin remains in me, I'm going to find it hard to do anything loving. And that's a trauma, isn't it? It's like, and you get yourself into a big bind about all that. But when it's just once you've dealt with the sin and the feeling in you is no longer to do it, when you notice an action that's like uneconomical, it's going to be easy for you to change it. It will also be easy for you to know how to change it.
Right.
Because the sin stops you from knowing how as well. Your sin is like a prison that says, I can only see this far. I can only do this far.
These are my options.
I can only cope this far.
Yeah. And it's not logical.
Yeah, it's not logical. It's just, you think it is, but it's not, right? And so the sin is like a prison that says you can only see a certain distance, you can only hear certain things, you can only listen to certain things, you can only analyse certain things. Everything else is like, I don't want to know about it. The sin is saying, I don't want to know about it, right? I don't want to know. I don't want to know that people are lying to me every day. I don't want to know that, I want to believe that everybody's nice, right? I want to believe that I'm coping. I want to believe that I'm not sad. I want to believe. So you could say the sin is saying, don't face reality. Can you see that? So it's saying, God says this is real. You're going, no, it's not. Your sin is saying, no, it's not. Your sin is saying, no, it's not. Like you're talking to really God saying, no, it's not real. What you've created is real, not real, is really what the sin is saying. And it's also saying that what us humans have created is the only thing that's real. Right? If you look here in this environment, what's the only things that are real? If you didn't maintain anything here for 10,000 years, what would be left? Nature, trees, animals, birds, creatures, because of the life cycles and everything. Would this be here? No. This building? No. Right? This building wouldn't be here. Would the cars outside be here? No. They'd be recycled by them, right? By the environment, right? Rust and all sorts of other things, they'd be recycled back to the earth, probably to dust, right? The house, would that be here? No. Would the roads be here? No. It'll all be gone, right? So what is real is the things that God created to be permanent, and everything else that humans have created is only real for a short period of time, isn't it? Right? And that's really like our sin. Our sin is creating all of these things that are not permanently real, but we think they're real. So when we say, let's go to Durham, right, which is it's part of the 3 cities here, isn't it, in this region, you think that's a real place. But from God's perspective, it's, in 10,000 years' time, it's not going to be there. Right? It's going to be a whole heap of processes that happen to the earth in between those times and now. It just won't be there. There'll be all sorts of things that have happened. And unless human sin maintains it, it won't be there. Right? Because God's whole universe is created to destroy your sin. Which also means destroying all the creations that we have that are all part of that sin. Right? The whole universe has been created to do that. So we've got to stop thinking that what we humans have created is real, including our sin. That's our thing that we believe is the most real. Right? And we've got to start seeing what is real. What is real is what God's created, and all we've got to learn to do is live in harmony with it for the time we're here. Then we'll have a great life. Right? That's how we have a good life. Yeah. Now, what's the time?
I think it's 1 o'clock. Yeah, 1:15.
Okay. Now, I haven't really, because of your questions, I haven't really done the completeness of this, have we, yet? So what we'll probably do now is have a break, shall we, for half an hour, have something to eat, And when we come back, I want to focus on how we've stored in these memories and how the hierarchy, if you like, of these 4 areas of our sin. That's what I'd like to focus on a bit. And then tomorrow we can start fleshing out actual issues and where the problems begin. Does that make sense? Because what we need to learn how to do is we need to learn how to become aware of our sin in terms of the biggest ones first. Because if you can solve your biggest ones first, then the small ones sort of drop away quite easily. Yeah? But most of us take the approach with most of our emotions that we want to solve the smallest thing first. Right? And that's not good for us because it means it's going to take us a long time. And what we want to do is try to reverse that so that we can start making progress that actually is impactful on our life. Because otherwise what will be happening is you'll be listening to divine truth for the 60, 70 or 80 years you're on earth, and then you'll pass and hardly any change has been made. And that's not really what we want. We want to have it so by the time you hit the spirit world, you've made so many substantial changes, you never have to go through the hells at all, and preferably not the whole first sphere, you skip that altogether, at least that. And that's going to be a lot to do with how we deal with this sin, as to whether that's going to be a fact in our life, right? So that's what we want to do. So let's have the break. Come back at 1:45, shall we?
Yeah, 1:45.
1:45.